Welcome to another show. My guest today is Candice Joseph, account manager at Edge Marketing, a marketing partner for Athlete Tech Group, and an advocate for greater diversity and inclusion in the marketing and advertising industries. And she, like me, and probably you, have experienced imposter syndrome. You know what I'm talking about. It comes in many forms, like when you feel you don't deserve the accolades that you receive, or that your opinion isn't something that your coworkers might respect, or that you got the job because you were lucky. And at some point, you're going to be exposed as the fraud that you really are. Those are just some explanation. Candice Joseph, how would you describe imposter syndrome?
I think for myself, mainly, mostly can describe it as that feeling of knowing that you have the skills and the knowledge to be where you are, but always worried that one mistake is going to trip you up and expose that maybe you're not as smart as you think you are, or maybe you're not as qualified as you think you are. And it's definitely living with that daily devil on your shoulder whispering to you that you're not good enough, even though you have what it takes on paper.
Now, for me, when I feel it most is not always in the workplace per se. It's when I am talking with someone who talks really fast and uses a lot of multisyllabic words.
Right.
And I don't think of myself as a person who isn't an intellectual person. I think I can have a conversation with people. But when I'm with people who just are on a different stratosphere in terms of the speed with which they talk, I suddenly start doubting myself, doubting my own intellect. How about you in your workplace experiences? What are some examples of how you felt imposter syndrome?
I mean, that's a great summary. For me, I often say to family and friends that my big words don't come out until I'm angry, because there's no need for multisyllabic words most of the time to express how you really feel.
I agree.
So I definitely remember being in boardrooms, knowing the answer, seeing a volley of thoughts and ideas going across the table, and then I pipe in with something simple.
Yep.
And while I will get a head nod, I won't get the same enthusiastic responses that have been volleyed back and forth prior to my interjection. So those moments I feel a little small, but then come to find out days later that yes, my idea was valid. And yes, what I had to say made sense and fully fit into the situation. And this happens many times in my career so far. So and I've also had the experience of not even wanting to speak up because I didn't have the big words, because they had already been used. And I didn't want to sound simple. I didn't want to sound like the dumb woman in the corner and at the boardroom table. So, yeah, I understand how you feel in that sense. And I can see how many of us, we think that in order to compete, in our public lives at work, we have to be very verbose, and we have to be very, like orating all the time, when sometimes we don't need that. And that's where we start to get the insecure feelings that come along with imposter syndrome.
So, Candice, do you think there's a link between imposter syndrome and a sense of perfectionism? I'm asking because my wife recently confessed to me that she often feels like an imposter whenever her boss refers to her as an all-star or a member of the all-star team. And she says to herself, if only you knew many of the things that I'm still struggling with or trying to figure out. Do you think that's common for other people or maybe yourself?
Yep, I agree 100%. I don't really dial into the idea of perfection or perfectionism. For me, it's a sense of overachieving. So I've had conversations today, actually, and with friends and family in recent weeks about the fact that I am an overachiever. I love competition. I love to think that I'm the best at everything I do. But I also like to work and achieve the best or the most for myself, I don't need the accolades. So when I do get the accolades from others, I often think, are they making fun of me? Are they doing this in a way to try to push me to do better, or are they being sincere in their praise? So
Mm.
it's a bit of a slippery slope, and it's a bit of a game that I play with myself. It's not always good, obviously, but it does definitely feeds the imposter syndrome beast, because I will replay conversations over and over again and then kick myself about how I responded, but then at the same time still push myself to do more, to learn more, and to be better.
So I wonder, because I like people like you, and I'm, probably because I feel I'm the same too. I will go over a conversation over and over. I would rather work with people who are over prepared than under prepared. I like
Mhm.
people who take things seriously, especially when it comes to quality work and making sure things are done on time, are done well, and want to hold each other accountable and hold themselves to a high account. So does that mean imposter syndrome can be a good thing? This idea of constantly sort of holding yourself to a higher standard, and could that motivate you to be greater?
I think that I don't want to call it, it's kind of in the middle of the survey question. It's neither agree or disagree with that. Um, Anything that has a negative connotation like imposter syndrome does, when dealing with it for too long and unchecked, can be detrimental to your development, because along with imposter syndrome comes self-sabotage.
Mm,
So you start to create scenarios that didn't happen, and you start to believe your own fatalistic ideas or beliefs about yourself. You don't try to achieve something because, well, I'm just not that good at it anyway.
mm,
You start to do that, so that becomes a disaster. But if you're looking at it like, hey, I'm in this job for a reason. Um, I may have this imposter syndrome sitting on my shoulder, that little devil to deal with, but watch me. I'm going to do this. Watch me. I can achieve these things. Give yourself those benchmarks that will continually prove to yourself that you are capable, you are where you're meant to be, and that you have something to offer to your position and to your workplace. That's kind of the approach that I've taken in recent years, as opposed to the self-sabotage that when I started out in my career, often kept me back.
I think that's great advice. You're an advocate for greater diversity and inclusion in advertising and marketing industries. I think not just within the sector, but also in the output
Right.
of that sector, the images that and messages that we see and hear. Uh, Studies have shown that imposter syndrome is felt more among not just women, but women in minority groups. Can you say more about that? Whether that makes sense, or if you can relate to the data that many of these studies show?
Absolutely. Before I was in marketing, I was kind of a self-marketer, because I was a wedding planner and I ran my own business. And Lord knows that in order to be an entrepreneur and in business for yourself, you have to be ready to sell yourself in all situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go to networking events to try to put myself in front of people. And to get my business out there. And more often than not, I was at events where there were a lot of white women in the wedding industry. It is
Mm,
very definitely dominated by white women. So I would have feelings of insecurity that would pop in there. Do I belong here? I know I'm great at planning weddings and the logistics and execution. I know I'm good at all of that, but is this a space that's for me?
right.
And it was at an event for Black women in business where I saw a Black woman speak, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but she was the first person about 10 years ago who used the words imposter syndrome. And the moment she said it, I was like, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But she framed it in the context that really spoke to me and resonated. where not only do we have as women, because the imposter syndrome trope had been started by, women were studied back in the 70s when the term was first introduced.
Mm-hmm.
But she framed it with the added layer of, when you walk into a space where no one looks like you, you've got the skill set, but you still hear the whispers of, you're not good enough, you don't belong here. And I can definitely say that as a racialized person working in Canada in the private sector, I definitely feel it. I feel that there are a lot of other Black women who feel like they constantly have to prove themselves. And, in a time right now where Black Lives Matter is a movement that everybody's paying attention to, and we're listening to Black people in general talk about how they've grown up with some of these messages that bleed into our everyday lives and our careers and our families and our health. One of the things that I know for sure, growing up and having now nieces and nephews and raising them with family and friends, is we tell them that you have to be better. You have to try harder. You have to prove yourself more. And I worry that messaging that I received and now passing on to another generation feeds into the imposter syndrome, that you're going to keep trying, but somewhere along the line, you're going to be somewhere where no one looks like you, and you're going to have to prove yourself more. And so that feeds into the insecurities that you already feel as a racialized minority in a country that's predominantly white, or in a workspace that doesn't reflect your community with the balance of different races and ethnicities and cultural backgrounds.
So let's close with some advice then, in addition to, like you said, be better, do better, face reality on reality's terms. What else? Once they do get into the workplace, we can always hope that there'll be faces that look like, our own, your own. And I couldn't agree more that certainly makes a difference. It makes you feel like, you're not the imposter. You're not a fraud when you see other people that look like you, but it's still that feeling is still going to be there. What can you do to overcome it?
So I definitely believe that if you're in a position, a job, or career that offers you some support medically, and that includes your mental health, take care of your mental health first and foremost. I can't stress this enough. We get so caught up in building our careers. We get so caught up in, as the young folks say, grabbing the bag. I think that's the term.
I'm old.
I don't know what it is, but it's something like that.
I just learned what flex meant.
Oh, geez. It's like, right. I won't hold it against you. But, you get caught up in that. And it's fun to test yourself and build your career, but it shouldn't ever come at the detriment of your mental health. So take advantage of your EPA. Yep. Find out what you can do. Find out who you can lean on in a professional capacity. And it doesn't have to be weekly, it doesn't have to be every month, but on a regular cadence that works for you, check in with yourself. But on a daily basis, you have family and you have friends. You have somebody in your life who knows you on a personal level that you can talk to about these things. They may not understand what you're dealing with at the workplace or in the boardroom or wherever you are, but they can just listen to you, offload any feelings of doubt, offload any feelings of insecurity, offload any microaggressions or things like that you've experienced externally, and the things that you've also experienced internally. Talk to somebody about it, that somebody who loves you and knows you intimately. And then finally, and this is something that I make sure that I do everywhere I've worked, is I connect with somebody who looks like me, sounds like me, kind of has had a similar journey through their career as that I've had, to remind myself and them that we're capable, and we can connect with one another on a different level. It's I wouldn't call it so much as a mentoring relationship, but it's a professional relationship where at the moment when you're at work, feeling like you're spiraling, you have somebody close by that you can say, hey, can you just gut check this for me? Somebody that can just remind you you're doing all right. Those are my top three. I think for sure, everybody's going to figure out what works best for themselves. But just as long as you're always talking about it to somebody, I think that is the best advice that I could give.
I like that. And one other piece that I came across in doing a little research, and by the way, for anyone looking up this term, sometimes imposter is spelled with ER and other times with OR at the end. So search both terms to get the full gamut of references and videos related to this important topic. One other solution that I came across was teach someone else to do something in your company. And it helps reinforce to you that you do know what you're doing. You are qualified to be there. And the more that you teach someone who's a peer or under you or above you how to do something, you're constantly reinforcing your abilities and subconsciously reminding yourself that you're in that job because you're the right person for that job.
That's fantastic. I really love that idea.
Yeah.
I think, to just jump in here, I think it happens naturally. You become the subject matter expert at something at your work, and you should be proud of that. If that's the one go-to that you have, be proud of it. Share your knowledge. Knowledge shares are key, and it doesn't have to be in front of a crowd. It could be a document you create, or it could be, a quick little group webinar, or in this new world that we live in, it's all a webinar, or a PowerPoint presentation or something like that that you can let live to show your ability and remind yourself and others that you know what you're doing and you deserve to be there.
Candice, you are the voice of calm in a turbulent world. I'm so glad we got to talk.
Same.
You can connect with Candice Joseph on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.